Feel the restorative power of the peace of this moment. A peace large enough to open to the concerns and sorrows that trouble us. A stillness quiet enough to respond to the joys and celebrations that enliven us. There is safety here in the rhythm of the breath. The ebb and flow of life is enacted with each one. Taking in oxygen sustenance, letting go of carbon dioxide waste. Taking in the fullness of experience, letting go of the residue that wants to cling to us. Cultivate inner peace and inner safety in this sanctuary dedicated to cultivating the spirit of life, dedicated to being a beacon of love for all beings. Let us be silent for a moment in the stillness. I'm so glad to be with you again this morning. I think I often plan my sermons around how often I can get congregations to sing the Fire of Commitment. I was just thinking today that perhaps I have done more sermons around fire or commitment or coming alive than any other topic, but that may not be true. I just love that song so much. So this morning I'd like to begin, in addition to loving that song, with a traditional Wiccan poem honoring the gifts of the goddess Bridget's fiery forge. This poem is often recited during the Celtic festival of Imbolc, the halfway point between winter solstice and spring equinox. Lunarly, that was celebrated on February 4th, but the traditional date is February 2nd. Bridget, they name me, and 3 gifts of fire I bring. First, the flame of inspiration, frenzy of poet, and anguish of artist, and passion of lover for union with the beloved. Second, the fierce fire of smithcraft, through whose testing all must pass. And third, the most precious of all, which eases the second's pain, the undying warmth of healing, the last and greatest gift of the ever-returning sun. Today, I'd like to talk about these 3 qualities of fire that feed our lives: passionate creativity, transformation, and sustenance. As we all know, fire can be hot and passionate. We can burn internally with ideas for projects, with excitement for our work, with desire for a lover, and with exuberance for our famous sport. And yes, that is a nod to the sports ball event of last Sunday, which seemed to capture a lot of attention. Fire can also be transformative, and it is often used that way in religious and spiritual contexts. We talk about burning away non-essentials, or using the burning to let go of old patterns of behavior. The heaviness of grief, guilt, and fear can be released by writing them on a piece of paper and offering that to the flames. We also talk of the power of transformation when we invoke the image of the phoenix, the bird who rebirths itself from the ashes of what it used to be. And of course, fire in some form is what sustains our life. The sun in the solar system gives heat and light to the planet. We use different versions of heating for cooking our food, warming our homes, giving us comfort and peace and healing. We have interactions with fire nearly every day, if not every day. And yet, I don't know if we always think about what aspect of that fire is present and how we might show up with gratitude or with a request for help. But before we go on more about fire, I want to talk a little bit more about Bridget. Each February, many pagans celebrate the holy day of Imbolc. Catholics call it St. Bridget's Day because the early Catholic Church couldn't stop pagans from honoring their goddess, so they simply adopted and adapted and named her a saint. Imbolc is the time where we reliably notice the light returning, even though the incremental advance of the light began at winter solstice. The word Imbolc refers to sheep and means in the belly, and connects us to the time of lambs, birds building nests for their eggs, and the knowledge that underground, the roots of plants are starting to wake up and gather nourishment that will push new green shoots up and out of the soil in a few weeks' time. This is the time to begin thinking of the ideas you've planted in your mind, the intentions you may have set in the past few months, like flower bulbs planted in the fall, with hopes of blooming in the spring. What might be stirring in the undercurrents of your awareness? What dreams do you have that could use a little extra warmth in order to begin growing? Now is a great time to stoke the fires of hope, to make plans for activities and changes that we want to see flourish in the months to come. Internally, our circadian rhythms start to hum a bit faster as we respond to the light as well. We start to feel more restless and want to look ahead to the season of growing and change. For those of us who are gardeners, we start planning layouts and thinking about starting seeds indoors or in greenhouses. The hardy plant known as hellebore, which is also called the Lenten rose, though not technically a rose, is often up and blooming. And even here in New York, the hellebore in my yard on the north side of the house was up a little bit with some tiny pink buds before the 15 inches of snow. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks. We hear the call of the earth in ourselves, and we look for signs of returning life. The buds on trees, the little bits of warmth in the wind. Reminds us that life keeps happening even through a pandemic. Part of the mystery of the birth, death, and rebirth cycle is the reminder of the constancy of change. And yet, it is also still much more dark each day than light, and we may not feel as energized as we'd like. And of course, there is the pressure around Valentine's Day, maybe not so much for Loretta, but it is often a time where the expectations that modern society insists on must be filled with romantic love and gifts and feeling special. But for many, it is just as much a trigger for loneliness and comparison. And it's still pretty cold too, at least here. And Ken was telling me you all have had a good stretch of cold weather too. Here in New York, we've already had more snow this month, mid-month, than the past 6 Februaries. And we've been inside for so long, even longer than our usual winter. So is there a way to honor those not so great, not so loving, not so passionate emotions, and still look to the possibility of something different, something more sustaining and life-giving? Usually there is. Let me tell you this story. Now, it's an old story, but not an ancient story, and it's true. It's a man named Ted Shawn, and the life he warmed to after the one flame he was tending went out. Ted Shawn was born in Kansas City, Missouri on October 21st, 1891. So as I said, old, not ancient. Originally intending to become a minister, he attended the University of Denver. And while pursuing his studies, he caught diphtheria. As part of his physical therapy, he was introduced to dance to regain muscle strength. But since this was 1910, dancing was discouraged by the university, which still had a Methodist affiliation. And the following year, he was expelled for not giving it up. He continued to dance, but he did not realize his true potential as an artist until meeting, dancing with, and then marrying Ruth St. Denis in 1914. Ruth was not only Ted's dance partner, but together they created an extremely valuable and influential creative outlet. Soon after their marriage, the couple opened the first Dennis Shawn School for Dancing in Los Angeles, where they were able to choreograph and stage many of their very famous vaudeville pieces. Their school and the techniques that they developed trained hundreds of performers and dance teachers of the early half of the 20th century. One of his favorite pieces of advice that Ted used to give to his dancers was, when in doubt, twirl. Now, I love that advice. And I take it to mean a literal twirl, which can be really fun, as well as a figurative twirl, which for me means to shake it up and get a little off balance for the fun of it. Look at things in a different way. Which brings us to Howard Thurman's famous quote about looking at things in a different way. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So what does it mean to you to come alive? And how do you even know you are? What does it feel like? Do you twirl? Sometimes in the cold of midwinter, it's hard to remember that feeling of aliveness. And that's where that fire comes in. Unless there's a big explosion, most big fires don't start out that way. They start from a small spark, a barely warm ember, or a fragile flame. Desire and passion are often like this too. We talk of feeling a spark of interest, holding a candle in the wind, or fanning the flames. This desire to create, whether creating a relationship, a work of art, or a political movement, comes from the synergy of our hearts and minds with the energy of the universal creation matrix, that life force that flows through all beings and through the earth itself, pushing and prodding, opening ways that were not so open before. So again, I ask you, what makes you come alive? Is it the sexual connection you have with your partner? Is it the joy you find in conversation with your friends and colleagues? Do you find a rising of passion for the work you do? Maybe not always in the everyday tasks, but the overall vision. Does athletic exertion and teamwork fan your flames of wanting more? Or is it the exuberance of being in nature, kayaking on a river, watching a hawk fly, noting the changing leaves in autumn? Now, sometimes passion can feel overwhelming, especially if we've let ourselves get a little bit stagnant in the passion department. It's tempting to try to dampen the flames and tell ourselves to be rational and don't get carried away and stay in control to manage the waves of excitement, the bursts of ideas, the emotions surging through us, urging action and connection. We might question our sanity or our sense of self. We might get really scared and try to sabotage or mitigate our response by denying how we feel, or even the fact that we're feeling at all if we've had experiences of passion that didn't end as we'd hoped. Yet the desire to touch and be touched physically, emotionally, and mentally in synergy with others is one of the ways we change the world. The aliveness of fiery passion leads to the transformative fire that we see when people come together for change. This is where the choice of how to manage fire becomes paramount. Will we combust in conflagration? Or will we channel our passion into a sacred fire that can transform ourselves and our communities from separate pieces of metal into a tool for building and growth? This kind of fire is sacred. This fire burns away all that is not applicable to the task, turns the extraneous to ashes, and tempers our inner fortitude for the work of transformation. It can look like grief. It can feel like pain. It can also feel freeing as we let go of the burdens and expectations of being someone we are not. As the name suggests, sacred fire is part of many spiritual traditions as well. From Yoruba to Hindu to Wiccan, Catholic, Santeria, Maori, and others, fire is very much present in the practices, as well as the practices of the First Nations people, whose land we now stand on. It is one of the 4 elements of nature, along with earth, air, and water. And in the Wiccan tradition, at least, it represents spirit. We feed this transformational fire through challenge and creativity, which is not always easy during this time of year. Some days I find that my creative juices are as slow to flow as the frozen snow on my yard. And my transformational fire can be more like the banked ashes waiting for the right kindling, barely an ember to be seen. While I value rest and the chance to be contemplative, I know that inertia can narrow my vision and make me believe there's no fire to be had either within or without. And if you're feeling that way too, it's okay. We've had a lot of reasons to want to pull back and rest, to protect ourselves from harm, both real and imagined. If you still need to rest and repair and reevaluate, know that that fire won't die out. You can stoke that fire when you're ready. And if you need a bit of reminding of how fiery you can be, just remember that your body turns food into energy through the power of internal fire. In Ayurveda, digestion is considered to be a sacred fire. The ancient Ayurvedic texts refer to this fire as Agni. Attending to our Agni is one of the best things we can do for our physical health. Our creative life too has Agni. We take in inspiration through our senses. What do we see and feel, taste, touch, hear, and intuit that makes us curious? At its root, a healthy creative Agni is a hunger for experience, a desire to create, and an excitement to greet the mysteries of each day. Those with a strong Agni know that each moment is rich with creative inspiration. You know, the more photographs you take, the more your eyes will see things you want to photograph. The more you write, the more there is to write about. The more you spice up your cooking, the more your taste buds come alive and call you to be interested in new flavors. And seeing the world as a place for transformation will remind you that you too have the power to transform. And once transformed, we become the sustaining fire by feeding the fire that sustains us. In the book, The Wind is My Mother, The Life and Teachings of a Native American Shaman, Marcellus Bear Heart Williams of the Muskogee Creek Nation speaks about the honoring of fire. In our Indian way, we say the fire is the sun here with us. The sun shines on the trees for days, weeks, months, and years, and the wood absorbs that sunlight. Then the tree is taken down, and when we put a flame to it, that sun is now here with us in the form of fire. We also say fire came to us a long time ago, so it's our grandfather. When that wood burns up, it turns gray like an old man, a grandfather, and we give it the same respect we give our elders. To be a fireman in our ceremonies is a position of great honor. Non-Indians have a fireman who puts the fire out. Ours starts the fire. When a fireman handles the fire, he handles it very gently because he's handling an old person. He doesn't shove the wood around because dishonoring the fire has its penalties. It can warm us, give us energy, and cook for us, but it can also burn us, burn our loved ones or our homes. So we always respect that fire, and we're very gentle with it, like an old person. And when our firemen put the flames out, they do it very gently. They don't just take water and douse it all at once. They do it gently because they're not putting the fire out, they're putting the grandfather to sleep. They're thanking grandfather for helping us, saying, now you've earned your rest. We thank you for your help. There may be a time when we are going to have to wake you up again and ask you to help us, but right now we want you to sleep. The fire that burns in our fireplaces is the eternal fire. It is the sun here with us, lighting our way. Among the different Indian tribes, we respect the fire that way. I think respecting fire is part of how we learn to accept the sustaining aspect of fire. We all know those people who seem to run around seeking inspirational fires here and there, but never stopping long enough to enjoy the warmth or the satisfaction of a well-cooked meal. I think of them as transformation addicts. They start projects but abandon them when the big change has died down and forget or ignore the value of sustaining a fire for a while before passing on the fire tending to someone else. There are also those who are so afraid of being burned themselves that they shoot fire in the form of anger and accusations, rather than look to the options available for tending and maintaining a sustainable fire. To sustain fire within ourselves, we must be in relationship with our moral compass, our personal integrity. To sustain the fire outside of ourselves, we must not only be willing to tend our personal fire, but be willing to tend to the fire we create in relationship, whether that is a relationship of love and physical intimacy, a relationship of collegial care and vision for our work, or the relationship of a community or cultural movement for justice, equity, and love. We cannot sustain anything if we don't truly show up. Once we commit to sustaining this fire, we often find the healing that comes from the warmth of those relationships and the comfort of knowing that our integrity of thoughts, emotions, and actions shine the light of our true selves. Sustaining fire within helps us to temper our fear with hope, our anger with compassion, and in the light of this fire, we find ways to see with deeper insight into our own shadows and pain, and bring that healing warmth to the wounds of violation, despair, rage, and dissociation that keep us feeling half dead inside. The power of this cycle of desire, passion, transformation, and sustenance is the power of life itself. Being alive is different than coming alive in the way that Howard Thurman described. When we fully acknowledge and invest in this cycle, we invite our aliveness to grow, to become. It is with this becoming that we change ourselves, invite change with others, and together we change the world.